You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
Kyle Mack is a study of the new self-made man, as he takes a possibly permanent break from pursuing a dual degree in business and psychology, and perhaps a less permanent break from a prosperous career in political activism. Mack is riding through his 20s on a wave divined by his entrepreneurial spirit. Monetizing his hobbies may look like a book or a podcast, but any which way, Mack intends to continue his own brand of libertarian anarchy, melding the fiscally conservative, socially liberal libertarian stance with a non-aggressive advocacy of property rights, both self and possession. What that ultimately seems to translate into is an assertion that the government institutions held untouchable for generations are, in fact, quite touchable. We're being lied to, and have been by these untouchable institutions, claims Mack. And the time has come for that religiosity of government, held by traditionalists and boomers, to stop as generations unite in common efforts toward a progressive and inclusive new norm. I'm Tate Chamberlain. In this podcast, my guest Kyle Mack and I attempt to reconcile the assumptions and concerns, absolutes and possibilities surrounding baby boomers' social, political, and economic legacy and its impact on generations to come. Welcome everybody to I Am Interchange. I'm your host, Tate Chamberlain, and I've got in the studio with us Kyle Mack. He's going to be on our upcoming live event, OK Boomer. How's it going, Kyle?
It's good. Thanks for having me. Was all kind of random, and I'm excited for the convo.
Yeah, I am too. I was talking to our mutual friend, Mike Daines, about this topic, and you came to his mind, I think, first.
Yep. Yeah, me and Mike have known each other for a while. We always kind of debate about stuff like this, so...
Yeah, his dad, as we both know, is going for re-election now against
Steve Bullock, yeah, which is going to be interesting because it went from being kind of a race that Steve Daines had everything in the bag, and now it's like I just saw poll numbers and they're basically even right now.
Yeah, it'll be, I think, one of the most exciting races to watch.
Oh, and a lot of money flowing into Montana for this. Yeah. It's going to be insane.
Kyle, where did you grow up?
I was born in Arizona, lived in Canada for a while. I'm dual citizen Canadian. And but I moved to Montana when I was like 10 years old, and I've been living here in the Valley for since then, so for 15, 16 years, however long that is.
Cool. So born in Arizona, what part of Canada?
Saskatchewan. I come from like a small farming town, oil town. Not a whole lot there besides that, just like flat land.
After Canada, did you come to Bozeman for school?
Well, I moved here when I was 10. So I went to a private Christian college out here when I moved here. Grew up with a single mom that worked a few jobs to be able to put me through that. And I came here just kind of my mom decided to have a change, and I moved with her, obviously. And now I kind of stuck around here. I've grown to love Bozeman in a lot of ways.
What generation are you?
I am a millennial. I was born in 95.
So you got here when you were 10, went to grade school, high school, and continued through MSU?
I was in MSU for some time. I actually dropped out. I was studying business and psychology, and I dropped out just for other opportunities. I got kind of bored with college, I guess. I was always a fine student. I just got bored. And I went on and I started working in politics for several years. Right now I'm kind of on a little bit of a hiatus from political activism, but I found a lot of passion in that type of stuff. So right now it's like I might go back and finish college at some point, but as of right now I don't really see much reason to at the moment. I'm pretty financially secure and pretty happy with where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so did you get inspired about politics while you were in college?
So I was in high school when the 2012 election was happening. It had just happened my senior year. I wasn't old enough to vote yet. I was 17. And so I got very interested because that was Obama-Romney. And I always kind of grew up in a conservative household, I guess you could say. So I started getting intrigued, and I grew up I grew up Christian as well. And all of that, I started kind of studying philosophy and economics more, kind of coming out. There's just kind of like a natural flow that came out of like all that interest that was happening when I was a senior in high school. So I started studying all that stuff kind of on my own time, and then I got involved as like an intern on campaigns and things like that later on. And then I kind of just had a natural flow that went into where I'm at now when it comes to philosophy and politics and all that stuff.
You were on a few political campaigns, and then did it segue into Americans for Prosperity?
Yes, yeah. I worked for Americans for Prosperity for several years. I left them a little over a year ago, I think. And so I was pretty much what I primarily did was I advocated for economic freedom primarily, which is just like getting people to like setting up incentives through government policy to advocate for free markets and incentives for people to live prosperous lives. That was kind of like everything that I did at the time.
Enter your hiatus. What word comes to your mind in this present moment in time?
Right now, chaos, because everything is pretty chaotic. We're living in a kind of a weird time. I think a lot of people have various stresses because of the time that we're living in, but and especially now because we have Corona and like shelves aren't stocked right now in grocery stores and stuff like that. But in my mind right now is like I feel like I have quite a bit of freedom at the moment. I'm in kind of more of a entrepreneurial spirit. In a lot of ways, I'm trying to figure out ways to monetize my hobbies, which is things like, talking about politics. I'm starting a podcast with a buddy. I'm writing a book in my free time right now. I feel, despite the chaos, I feel pretty free right now. That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm a young single guy. Like, I don't have a whole lot of responsibilities when it comes to like, looking after children right now, like a lot of parents might have to because, kids are home from school right now because of the quarantine. So I don't have to necessarily worry about a lot of that stuff at the moment. But right now, yeah, I'm kind of in that space where I can kind of do what I want to, kind of explore new avenues and kind of the way that I go about things. Like most of what I do, like the quarantine itself hasn't really kept me from pursuing my own passions because we live in the age of the internet and you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as you have a computer with you. And that's kind of where a lot of everything that I'm doing right now is like I can pretty easily do it wherever.
You describe yourself as a libertarian anarchist.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Which sounds pretty radical.
What does that mean?
I was very inspired by a few economists, Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, when I was young. And I used to have kind of a standard political view when I was younger, and this is obviously a lot more. I grew up fairly conservative. Like when I was like in high school, I'd probably just like call myself a Republican, like whatever that means anymore. I essentially what anarchism is, and especially like this brand of anarchism, because there's a lot of different brands of it, is I believe in non-aggression and advocating for property rights, and not just property rights in the sense of like I'm able to own stuff, but I also own myself and I own my actions, and I own the responsibility for those actions. I have to take responsibility for those. And it's an individualistic philosophy. And when it comes to aggression, when we're talking about politics or just interpersonal relations, like from individual to individual, it's a view on morality that says that the initiation of violence against nonviolent people is bad, essentially. And governments aren't exempt from that. Like they don't have any necessarily moral legitimacy over individuals when it comes to acts of violence.
Yeah, so self-accountability as well as economic accountability.
Yeah.
Are libertarians socially liberal?
Yeah, like there's that common way of viewing it as fiscally conservative, socially liberal. I think it largely comes down to it's just like there's no monopolization on force that can really tell you how to live socially.
How does that work with Christianity and your personal beliefs?
I grew up Christian. I don't know if I would necessarily call myself Christian anymore. I'm kind of agnostic in a lot of ways. Like I've philosophically changed in a lot of ways when it comes to religious beliefs. I'm not an atheist by any means, but I'm probably very agnostic.
Just kind of don't know.
Yeah, it's more of like I don't know and I'm not going to pretend to know. And I feel like that's the most honest position I could probably take on that. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of appreciation for Christianity and various other religions. I've studied like Taoism and Buddhism to some degrees, and I find those very interesting. But when it comes down to it, I see when it comes to like government and when we're talking about like, these like large swaths of wealth that we're talking about, like redistribution, and that's always kind of like the buzzwords that we hear on on campaign trails and stuff like that. I see a lot of the fervor that people have towards the state or government systems in very much like a religious mindset. Like I think a lot of people have a religious mindset when it comes to it, and a lot of it's accepted on faith, like
kind of where
it's
the
blind faith.
separation of church and state argument comes in.
Yeah. Like a lot of it is just kind of accepted on blind faith, and I see that a lot when it comes to economics and too. Like something I'm very interested in is I kind of do on the side is like currency trading and stuff like that. And I have a very, I think, different view on like monetary policy and the US dollar and what's happening right now because of like economic collapse because of the coronavirus, is that a lot of people have just kind of accepted blind faith in the value of this thing that we have that is the US dollar. And when it comes down to it, nobody really foresaw the crash that was happening. And despite this booming economy, which libertarians have been warning people about for a decade.
Yeah, it all got lost. All the gains that Trump has made have kind of evened out, haven't they?
And it's not just everything that happened under the Trump presidency. It's stuff that happened under Bush and Obama as well.
Yeah, it's totally a systemic.
Yeah, it's like we've been fiddling with really low interest rates for so long now, and we're so deep in debt, 22 trillion, 23 trillion, whatever the number is now. It's like nobody really even seems to care anymore. And there's no savings in America. So when there's a rainy day that comes, it's like we're just acting like there was never going to be rain that comes.
How's that make you feel as a fiscal conservative?
Oh, I'm very disappointed in the state of the Republicans who claim that they're super fiscally conservative on everything. I'm very disappointed. And there's this like magical thing that happens every election when like Team Red or Team Blue switches like who's in office. There's like this magical thing where everybody just kind of has amnesia about their political beliefs, and then everybody just kind of flips sides on various issues, and like everybody just changes their minds on everything. So it's like you had the Tea Party that was like super all about like bringing down the debt and stuff like that. Then when you have like Republicans that like sweep in 2016, it's like, it doesn't really matter anymore.
How did that make you feel? I mean, did you vote red in the election, and how do you feel
now? I voted for Harambe, the
gorilla?
the gorilla that got killed in the Cincinnati Zoo.
So you couldn't vote for either?
There's things I like about Trump. In particular, things that I like about Trump is that I think that he's like, whether willingly or unwillingly, I think that he's peeling back this layer that people view with like this religiosity on these institutions in government and the intelligence agencies, in the corporate press, like all that thing. I think that a lot of people are kind of now seeing an element there where it's just like, oh, we've been getting lied to about X, Y, and Z issues for our entire lives. And so like there's something that's nice about Trump in that regards, because I don't find any like honor or prestige in these institutions as an anarchist. So I kind of like that element of the Trump presidency. But when it comes down to it, is like I disagree with Trump on plenty of issues. I agree with him on plenty of issues. Like it doesn't matter. I don't really view it in that light. I think there's plenty of things that I can't condone, especially when it comes to like some of the foreign policy decisions that have been happening too.
I study integral facilitation, and it's about studying polarities. And part of that is something called shadow, and everybody has a shadow. It's the side of us that we choose not to acknowledge.
Oh, it's like the Jungian concept. Carl Jung, the psychologist, talks about
there's a lot of different terms
when it comes to psychology. Carl Jung used to talk about the shadow self.
Sure, yeah. So it's a side that we choose not to acknowledge, or might not even know that is there. And so I've kind of been thinking about America's shadow, and I think a lot of that. I think we're being forced to kind of look at our own shadow right now.
I think that this era that we live in is very much like that. And Trump, like him or not, he's kind of a catalyst for viewing that stuff. And it's not just in the political world. Like it's just kind of like all across, like all the institutions that we've developed up over time is like we're taking a very critical view on how we operate as a society right now. And, all of us have different opinions on what that's going to be, on where we're going to go after this. But I think it's healthy for some of the cynicism, some of the skepticism, some of the questioning that is happening right now. I think a lot of that's healthy.
You mentioned your mom earlier. What generation is she?
I believe she was born in 1964, so I guess she'd be like right on the cusp of boomer.
She might be a late boomer.
Yeah, I think that's the last year of boomers.
Yeah.
I think how we view it.
What does she do?
She's done like bookkeeping. She's done bookkeeping for various different companies.
Was your dad ever in the picture?
No, not really. My dad is is up in Canada, and I don't really have any relationship with him.
What was something you thought your mom and dad's generation did well?
The boomer generation, just like older generations as a whole, I guess, like I do think that there's a lot of wisdom that can be taken from generations just because of, like, they've lived in different times, they've gone through different experiences. I think it's, especially because, like, I'm a libertarian anarchist, I think it's much easier to talk about the things that I think all the previous generations did wrong when it comes to, because, like, we're going to be talking about kind of like generational wealth and how it's distributed throughout society. You know, coming to the top of my head, I can't, like, necessarily think of something in particular that I would, like, grab on that, like, yeah, this generation did this well, which sounds bad, but, like, I think there's still a lot of wisdom that can be taken from that generation.
Some might say growth in medicine or technology.
Yeah, like, I guess in general, if we're talking about, like, despite, like, how much we can complain about various things that are happening right now, despite all that, like we're still living in a wealthier time than we've ever lived at in human history, regardless of all that stuff. And, like, each generation has kind of taken on responsibilities on their shoulder to get us there. I just think that a lot of these generations, there's been a lot of bad problems that have also happened during those times as well. I would never discount, like, the development of, like, medicine and stuff like that that's happened in the last 50 years.
What was something that they didn't do so well?
I think a lot of the problems that I see with our society in general have come with a sense of entitlement that has come, and, like, it's very easy, like, to say that millennials are also super entitled, but I think a lot of the programs that have been put in place, particularly in, like, the 60s, also various other programs throughout the last century as well.
Like Medicare, Medicaid?
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I'm opposed to those things. I see Social Security very much as a wealth transfer from the poor young people up to the older generation, because I see it as very much like a Ponzi scheme. The money's not there, and we're just redistributing wealth from young to old now. I don't see any.
Yeah, I don't know the statistics. I think when they started Social Security, something like 3% of the country latched on, and now I don't know what the percentage now is, but there's a much higher percentage of people on it, as well as inflated medical prices and the pharma industry, and so that's where kind of the tension is. With that.
Yeah, and it just it causes so many false market signals because it artificially increases demand on all these things. And on top of that, you have, like, a monopolization on retirement plans. Like, that's basically what it is. So there's no actual competition that's existing and, like, an actual market for any of this. So I think Americans were duped. Like, I think that's a lot of this was just that Americans were duped, and we don't have the money to fund these programs.
How should our older generations be taken care of?
I think if there wasn't a monopolization on retirement plans, on elderly healthcare stuff, like, there's still every incentive for market forces to come in and try to make money off of doing that.
So capitalism would come in.
Capitalism. And when I say capitalism, like, I want to be kind of clear on this because a lot of people kind of have, like, different feelings about that word. I have difficult feelings about that word. I'm not a fan of the word itself. Like, what I mean by that, like, trying to get my definition straight, is no government intervention in the economy. I don't mean what I think a lot of Marxists would criticize, and I think rightfully so criticize, is, like, the private-public cooperation that's happening. I'm very much against that because right now what is kind of deemed as capitalism in our current society is the idea of, like, us bailing out Boeing. like I'm very much against, like, corporate welfare and stuff like that. Like, I do believe that market forces would very much kind of alleviate a lot of these problems that we're seeing when it comes to
if we didn't keep bailing them out.
Yeah.
So this topic, okay, boomer, came about because what we've kind of been alluding to, this big wealth transfer that's about to happen. What comes to your mind when you hear the term okay boomer?
The memes. I'm a creature of the internet. I find the memes pretty hilarious. One of the biggest things is, like, there's this feeling that I think millennials, Gen Xers to a degree, and then Gen Z have, where there's this condescending nature that boomers will often have. And I think this is something that happens, like, this generational warfare just kind of always exists between generations. This is just kind of the current iteration of it, where there's, like, this condescending attitude of, like, older people will often be kind of like, I was like, well, you haven't lived a full life. So like, I obviously kind of know what's right in this situation. And so like the okay boomer meme is just kind of like poking at that little absurdity. Is like, yeah, like there's a lot of wisdom that you've gained from older life, but like we're also growing up on like the age of the internet, and we have all these new problems to deal with that you haven't really necessarily gone through. You've gone through your own problems, but like there's also the current things that you don't really fully understand right now.
What are some other stereotypes that you have about the different generations? Is there a stereotype you have about Gen Z?
I actually kind of like a lot of stuff that's coming out of Gen Z right now. Like I think that there's good and bad that comes out of all these generational conflicts. Gen Z is probably going to have to deal with things in a completely different way than even millennials have, because like our generation, I guess because you're a millennial, right? You're just like later on, is like we came in like kind of right on the cusp, right before like the internet came in to be a thing. Is like Gen Z is coming out where it's like, kids are getting smartphones right like at early age. Everything's on the internet. They're learning everything on the internet. Like all of our institutions kind of have to change because of that. Like the internet is one of the primary factors, and I think a lot of this stuff, because like they have every bit of information. I mean, we all do, but like they grew up this way where they have every bit of information. Yeah, they have every bit of information at their fingertips, and it's just like that's a lot of information to deal with. So like there's a lot of costs and benefits that are going to come out of that.
What about a stereotype about millennials?
I mean, there's always the stereotype that we're lazy or whatever. And I mean, you could probably say that about people from any generation. Like
there's some people who are lazy. And
it's going to be like that. But there's also plenty of entrepreneurial millennials, and plenty of people that do hard work and all that stuff. Like not everybody's necessarily like there's the kind of the stereotype that like millennials have kind of been coddled their entire life. So like they don't really know what like the harshness of reality is going to be. But,
is that true?
I mean, you can maybe say to a degree.
Tom, the silent generation on this topic, would say that he grew up very poor and they didn't have $700 phones. And I think he would describe his growing up as the same age. He had a lot less.
Well, and yeah, that is a thing, because now, like however many years ago, like people were living on way less to be able to get by, but they did get by, and we have so much wealth that now exists. Like even poor people are able to get like fancy TVs and stuff like that. Like people that would be under the poverty level. Being poor in America is not in 2020 is not the same as being poor in America in 1950. Like it's a completely different reality. So to a degree, there's a great book from psychologist Jonathan Haidt called "The Coddling of the American Mind," where he talks about kind of coddling that's happened, and it largely came because of just parenting changes. Like we changed the way that we parented our children. Like there's the whole helicopter parenting argument and all that stuff. So like a lot of those, like all of those are variables that exist in kind of this like large equation.
Kind of like a hypersensitivity.
Yeah, hypersensitivity. And you see that of like 2013, which is the year that I graduated high school, you started to see a lot of that come into play, particularly on college campuses, because these kids were now going to college in the year 2013, where there's a lot of like, it's like the whole safe space thing and all of that, where you can't really, I guess coddling is probably the right word. It's like there is kind of a coddling where people are kind of like shutting out differing, like different opinions and stuff like that. And there's becoming less dialogue, I think, that exists, particularly in that like strand of millennials and Generation Z.
Are safe spaces good?
No, I'm opposed to like the idea of safe spaces on college campuses. Like college campuses are a place for you to grapple with a diversity of ideas.
And a safe space doesn't allow for that?
No, it's like if you're gonna shut off ideas, I think that inhibits all aspects of learning. Like
opposing ideas or ideas that cause friction.
Yeah, like I would very willingly have a conversation with anybody that I disagree with. Like I'm sure you and I disagree on plenty. Like I'm an anarchist. Like like a lot of people disagree with me.
Where do you think interchange is?
I don't know. Like I imagine that. I don't know what necessarily your political beliefs are.
Our mission is to explore polarities.
Yeah.
And kind of beat up both sides. Our mission is to foster curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
Which I think is a noble goal. Like I find it's so much more interesting, the people on the fringes on any side of any argument. Like the people that just kind of are wishy-washy and hang out in the middle, like it's just like we've heard those arguments a million times. Like there's no innovation that's happening. Like all the innovation exists on the fringes, whether it be on the extreme right, on the extreme left, on the like radical I hate government side, or on like whatever it is. Like
So like
that's where
anti-establishment, maybe?
Yeah, and I have a lot of sympathy towards the anti-establishment people. Like I know that like on the panel that we're going to be doing, I know that there's a girl that is a huge Bernie supporter. I completely disagree with Bernie on like 90% of issues, but I have a lot of sympathy towards like the Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, like those anti-establishment people on the Democratic side. Like I disagree with their domestic policies on a large degree, but I think that they're fighting a very difficult fight right now, and there's a lot of forces that don't want them to be successful. And we just saw Tulsi bend the knee this morning, right? So like I find those people just more interesting. Like I just would much rather have a conversation with those types.
In the next 30 years, between baby boomers and the silent generation, there's an estimated $68 trillion wealth transfer that's going to happen, making the millennial generation the wealthiest generation ever. We talked about it a little bit. This kind of generational tension has always arisen, and transfers of wealth has always happened. Is there anything different this time?
It's hard to say, because like this is just kind of a trend that happens in every like move from one generation to the younger generation. I don't know if I would say that there's necessarily anything different. I think some of the stuff kind of maybe external variables on we as a society are different in a lot of ways. There's much more wealth that's going on than has ever been before, but we have much more everything than that's gone on before. Like, I don't necessarily know if like that's a problem that all of a sudden millennials are just going to be getting all this wealth through inheritance or whatever. Like, I kind of think that a lot of it's going to be business as usual. I don't necessarily know if there's any problems or like negative consequences or positive consequences from all this.
Do you think that, I mean, that's a lot of money. And when you look at the statistics, 21% of the wealth belonged to baby boomers when they were the same age as millennials. And now that millennials are the same age, own 3%. After this wealth transfer happens, it's predicted that the income gap will be even worse off.
Like the income gap of just like top earners and low earners?
Yeah,
is that what we're talking
like
about?
income inequality.
Yeah, right.
Because the transfer of wealth will happen to the small percentage of families that still have it today. Since younger generations didn't earn it, will they know how to manage that kind of money?
Well, did the older generation know how to manage the money either?
Yeah, but like we're talking also, that this is way more.
Yeah, it's like I think that like there's going to be problems with like there's often kind of the stereotype of like the rich trust fund kid that receives a bunch of money from like rich daddy or whatever, and then they end up blowing all that money away, and then they end up going broke, and then there's just like that money gets filtered back into the economy. Like there's going to be people that make do with it. They end up becoming more entrepreneurial. They end up taking over their family business. They end up doing, whatever with that money. And then there's going to be people that blow it. I don't think that necessarily changes.
That's always happened
because the amount of money that is going to happen here. We have a financial problem in this country, which is I don't know if that's it though. Like I think that things will kind of just go on as business as usual with that transfer. Like we just have more stuff now. Like I don't think that changes.
Is there income inequality?
Well, I mean, there's obviously inequality all across all factions everywhere. Whether it be income or like we could say that about any subject. Is it an inherent problem? I wouldn't say that the inequality itself is an inherent problem. I think that there's other problems that are much more I was going to say other problems that are much more problematic. And largely I think the problems that are much more important to face are the cronyism that's existing between the high earners and the government, not necessarily the differences in like actual income levels.
You're a secret Bernie Sanders fan.
Well, I think actually I think that's kind of an interesting thing actually. I think something that I like about Bernie is like me and him have kind of like the same enemies, you could say. I just radically disagree with his solutions.
Healthcare for all and
like he targets the same people. He targets the big banks. Like I'm an abolish the Fed guy. Like I'm completely opposed to the Federal Reserve and the wizardry that they do with our money supply. Speaking of which, what they just did with the coronavirus with $1.5 trillion QE. I don't think that like having government come in and create more regulation is going to solve the problem. I think that's going to enhance the problem. We just have different views on that.
So government involvement. What do you think of the Green New Deal?
I'm opposed to it. I don't think that having I don't think that taking away tons of money through taxation and stuff like that and funding all these programs is the way to approach it. I think that there are problems that are existing with climate. How much those problems are, how much are actually being overblown versus not overblown, like those are all up for debate. I'm open to hearing anything in there. I wouldn't claim to be an expert on climate science or anything like that. I don't think that just radically changing the way that we do fossil fuels just like over the course of like 10 years is going to solve all the problems. I think it's going to cause way more externalities, like impoverishing people, causing mass starvation. I think a lot of those will come in from doing way too radical changes way too fast in the way that we approach this stuff.
How will mass starvation be caused from
Well,
fossil fuels?
I think a lot of the wealth that we've accumulated over the last 100 years or so is largely because of fossil fuels. They've caused us to be way more productive in society, which just naturally brings you more wealth. Are there problems that exist with that? Yes, like obviously we have problems with CO2 in the air. There's that. I think that we're now, because we have all this wealth, we are able to look for more green solutions, whether it be solar or wind or nuclear. I'm for an all of the above type of person. I think I would love to see innovation in all of those elements.
So you care about the environment?
Oh yeah. I live in Montana. It's beautiful here. I don't want to see everything smogged up.
Is there a crisis? Is there a climate crisis right now?
I personally question how big the crisis is as of right now, because like you hear numbers like the world's going to be uninhabitable in like 20 years or for our grandchildren or whatever. You hear all these. I hear all these different arguments.
The UN stat is that if they have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that our goal is to accomplish by 2030. And the idea around that is that beyond 2030, it could be irreversible. They've also said various other things when it came to like global cooling in the 60s as well, that life would be uninhabitable by 2000 and stuff like that. Yeah, like those things also exist too. So it's like it's one of those things where it's like I'm not sure how much is propaganda, how much we should actually be alarmed with, and so on. Like, and I wouldn't be the person to necessarily talk about those things because I don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily see as a large effort by the federal government coming in and doing this as the correct approach to it. Is that enough? Like, will capitalism solve the climate crisis, or will it need the government's assistance?
Well, right now we're living in a society where the government has its hands in everything. And I don't really see a way around that. A lot of the solutions are probably going to come from cooperative effort from the private side and the public side. Is that purely the best efficient way that I would advocate for? No, but it's probably the way that it's going to happen.
What's the way you would advocate for?
Oh, I would have it completely private. I would have private industry doing all this stuff. Everyone has incentives for having a clean environment, and there's going to be people that pollute, and there's going to be people that want to create new batteries that are more sustainable and things like that, and new solar panels that are more efficient. And when you move and when you get to a point where new innovations coming through, because inventors are creating new things, and that's able to give you cheaper, cleaner energy, people will start to naturally gravitate towards those. It takes time. I'm doubtful that we're going to see uninhabitable life in like 30 years or irreversible. I'm doubtful of that. I think that's probably extreme. Like most things are usually extreme when we're talking about these things.
Should national emergencies be bailed out by the government or by capitalism?
National emergencies? Like, what do you mean? Like, are you talking about something like Corona right now, or is this like a national emergency?
Should the climate crisis be treated as a national emergency?
I don't know. I don't necessarily know on that. I think that capitalism will be more efficient in bailing us out of various emergencies just because of incentive structures. And I don't think big centralizing monopolistic forces are usually the best at following incentives. When it comes to, I don't think, like, are we talking about like corporations being bailed out in this stuff, or like just like we're just bailing out the earth when it comes to
bailing out the earth?
Like, I guess my answer is
you
just
don't
no.
think government should be involved. It should just be capitalism.
That would be my ideal situation. Obviously, we're not living in my ideal situation, though.
How would you manage the coronavirus that has been deemed a national emergency? Should it be bailed out by government or?
I don't think putting a $1.5 trillion stimulus package is going to do anything of money that doesn't exist. Like, we're just creating money out of thin air, which is going to lead to hyperinflation, like it always does in every country that ever does this.
How would you solve it? How would you how would you calm the nerves of anyone in the entertainment industry or food industry who is going to struggle to pay rent?
I don't think there's going to be anything that like capitalism or government can do to calm people's nerves about this. Like, the cat's kind of out of the bag with this whole coronavirus thing, and we're going through this regardless. Like, nerves are going to be on high strung for months. What I wouldn't do is bailing out all these corporations. We have a problem where there's no incentives to save anymore in this country, largely because of artificially low interest rates, which doesn't matter if you're on Team Red or Team Blue. All of them have been doing that, and a lot of these corporations, like Boeing, for instance, who's getting a bailout, are made bad bets with their money. And what you do is, like, you don't reward people for making bad bets, and that's all that these handouts are doing.
So you're not for giving handouts to corporations. What about the little guy?
For the little guy, I mean, I'm not for government handouts in anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how big or how small.
So if you were president, you wouldn't give the $1,000 check to everyone?
I come from a very distinct school of economics, the Austrian school. I would not follow this model. We've been running on what I see as a flawed Keynesian model for a century now, basically. And I don't think that just like saddling yourself with more debt, printing more money, and just going through this and just handing out money, it's going to inflate currency, and it's going to cause prices to go up. It's going to cause all these other externalities that exist in the marketplace. And I think one of the biggest problems that we had after the 2008 crisis is that we didn't let the recession actually go through to its full extent. We tried to put a Band-Aid on a very large problem, and now we're going to suffer the consequences of us not going through the full recession. There's a boom and bust that exists within the economy, and if we just keep propping up these artificial bubbles in all of these different sectors of the economy, whether it be housing, whether it be the stock market, whether it be the U.S. dollar, any of these things, whenever that pin comes that pops the balloon, which for us is Corona, it looks like now, it's going to cause more pain the more that we've inflated that bubble.
So let it ride out and let people deal with the consequences, but slowly grow out of this in a healthy way.
The recession of any economy is the cure. It's not the disease. The disease is the gross negligent spending and and just like the ridiculous nonsensical handouts that we just give to everybody that continues to fail, whether it be the banks, whether it be Boeing, whether it be whatever corporations, like we need to let these things kind of settle for us to be able to actually get back to like any sense of normalcy. Otherwise, because like I wouldn't be surprised if we see in the next few months that we start to go in negative interest rates like Greece did. Like it's very possible. Like there's no money to hand out anymore. Like that's kind of the problem is that most people kind of have this attitude that money is just going to, like, the Fed just prints the money and we just and the government just kind of hands it out, and there's just like all this money that's just flowing around. That's not
22 trillion.
That's not how economics
baby.
works. Yeah, it's like our money supply is entirely based on just debt. There's nothing there.
Should younger generations have kids?
Yeah. I see no reason why younger generations shouldn't have kids.
I'm curious, Sarah, one of the reasons why she started the Sunrise Movement in Montana was because the stress of all the news articles about the climate and the state of the world had her wondering whether she should have kids or not. And it kind of kept her up. The anxiety kept her up. And I'm excited to get into that with her and you and Tom because she's really nervous about that.
I always hear that argument of like, oh, the world is just like filled with all the suffering, so I wouldn't want to bring a kid into this world. Like, I always hear that argument. I think it's kind of like, despite all the problems that we're kind of discussing here, is like, we're living in a pretty good time, regardless. I don't think that should stop people from living out their lives however they want to live out their lives. I like, have kids, don't have kids, do what you want. Like, I don't see problems regardless.
Do you believe older generations are leaving the world better than they found it?
I think the world has gotten better with each generation, despite the things I might complain about. I'm very happy that I live in 2020. It's way better than living in 1920. It's way better than living in 1820. Like,
being a millennial, what kind of wisdom would you hand down to younger generations?
I think experiment, heed the wisdom of the older generation, but don't take it as like written law. We're living in chaotic, changing times where like new technologies are constantly forming. The old norm isn't always the best. Like, for instance, like I dropped out of college because I think that colleges are kind of getting a little bit ridiculous right now. And I think that there's a lot of like religiosity in the idea of getting this piece of paper and that's the only way to be successful. Like, there's a lot of different paths in life. There's not just like one set, this is the golden way that you can go about and this is the only way. Not everyone knows everything about everything. So like, just kind of like heat out and pave your own path.
Is there anything about this topic that excites you the most?
I think it's going to be interesting hearing a diversity of opinions here because, like we've mentioned, I'm a creature of the internet. So, like a lot of how I see a lot of this generational stuff, I see the okay boomer thing just because like millennials on Twitter are tweeting about it. I think it's going to be interesting to see like the actual generational divide that exists on how and on just entire outlooks on the world. Just because, I mean, there's like 80 years of differing amounts of experience that are going to be having a conversation. But also, in particular, it's just like a variety of political persuasions, and there's going to be plenty to debate on that. I think it's going to be a good, healthy debate that's going to come in on this.
Well, Kyle, Mack, thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to our May 7th event, OK Boomer.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Every human, every generation, regardless of assets and opportunity, is fallible. The old norm isn't always the best, and as the landscape of work and wealth and the very fabric of necessity shifts, so does and should that norm. But that isn't to be feared, asserts Mack. And efforts to continually avert financial crisis, in particular, are the last place governments and individuals should be focusing their efforts. The recession of an economy is the cure. It's not the disease, insists Mack. The disease is gross, negligent spending and the ridiculous, nonsensical handouts we continue to give anyone that fails. These bailouts, rewards for the corporate bad bets, prop up the artificial bubbles of housing, interest rates, and the very dollar, and do more harm than good. We need to heed the wisdom of older generations, remarks Mack, but don't take it as written law. As millennials define a new American dream, economically, politically, environmentally, and socially, they, in turn, will pave a path of triumphs and missteps for those yet to come, as it always has been, only different.
A special thank you to Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, the State of Montana, Ben Johnson Photography, Loken Productions, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss.
A shout out to our editors and media team, Pat Loken, Jessup Sandoval, Allison Gregory, Shannon Hughes, Jessica Byerly, Jacob Desch, Nathaniel Johns, and Nicholas Hill. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? We want to hear from you. Shoot me a message at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Until next time, Share airtime and don't ruin dinner.